Ever read a report or an essay and felt completely lost, like you were wandering through a maze blindfolded? Well, welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to completely demystify the mechanics of organizing an essay. You know, writing often feels like this chaotic, mystical process, but we're going to look at the writer as an architect, building a clear structural system. By the end of this, you'll see how arranging information with pure intention can completely transform how your reader absorbs your message, turning that confusing maze into a brilliantly illuminated pathway. Here's our blueprint for today's explainer. We're covering 1. Structuring the essay body, 2. The chronological pattern, 3. Playing with time, 4. The process pattern, and 5. Sequences and grammar. Section 1. Structuring the essay body, the writer's blueprint. Okay, let's dive into this. Think of your introduction and conclusion like the foundation and the roof of a house. They do a great job of holding up your ideas and keeping your evidence neatly in order. The intro lays out the directions, and the conclusion seals the whole thing with a nice sense of finality. But what about that massive space in the middle? If you rip out the foundation or the roof, the whole structure collapses, right? Well, the exact same thing is true for the main body of your text. Without a reliable, specific structural system acting as those load-bearing walls in the middle, your reader gets totally confused, the central argument falls flat, and you're just left with a pile of disconnected ideas.
So how do we build those load-bearing walls? There are 3 main organizing patterns writers rely on: linear relationships, spatial relationships, and comparison and contrast. Now, sure, you can combine these in a longer, more complex piece of writing, but there's a golden rule here. Once you choose a primary pattern for a section, you have got to stick to it. Suddenly switching patterns mid-essay is literally the fastest way to give your reader mental whiplash. Today, we're going to focus heavily on the absolute backbone of clear communication, the most widely used structure of the bunch, the linear relationship.
A linear relationship does exactly what it sounds like. It moves your reader through the text in a straight, unbroken line connecting point A to point B. You actually use this pattern every single day. Whether you're telling a friend a story about a crazy weekend or explaining to a new hire how to log into a software portal, you are relying on linear organization. In writing, this pattern is mostly used to map out events across time, which we call a chronological pattern, or to detail logical step-by-step actions, which is the process pattern. Honestly, it's just the most direct, frictionless way to transfer an idea straight from your brain into your reader's brain.
Section 2. The chronological pattern, writing based in time. Usually, we experience time moving strictly forward, and standard chronological writing follows this exact logical path. Take John Frere's archaeological discovery, for instance. A writer can perfectly map this out using specific chronological signal phrases to pull the reader through decades of history. Without these time markers, your reader is untethered, just floating in a sea of facts. But listen to these textual anchors. As long ago as 1779, then in 1800, skipping to another 60 years, and finally bringing us safely to now. These dates aren't just minor details. They are the engine pulling the reader forward, giving them an effortless glide through history.
Section 3. Playing with time, bending the rules.
But here's the really fun part. As writers, we aren't bound by the laws of physics. We can completely manipulate the reader's experience by messing with how time flows. Imagine an expected, straightforward sequence. It starts in 1928 with Ahmed Dinbud's father's death and traces forward to his emigration from Kashmir in 1947. Highly logical, sure, but maybe a bit dry. Now compare that to a dramatic sequence. It hooks human psychology infinitely better by starting right at the 1947 climax, leaving for Pakistan on a cold March morning, before suddenly flashing backward into his past traumas to explain exactly why he's leaving. It creates an immediate mystery that the reader just desperately wants to solve.
When you drop an unexpected time sequence like that on your reader, it instantly captures their attention. You're forcing them to focus on the deep emotional motivations rather than just a ticking clock. To pull this off smoothly, you really have to rely on grammar. Specifically, treating verb tenses as a kind of camera lens. Instead of just using the simple past tense, you can mix in the past perfect to signal to your reader that we're zooming further backward in time. This grammatical camera work lets you bend the timeline effortlessly, adding massive dramatic emphasis without ever confusing your audience.
Section 4. The process pattern, the assembly line of logic.
Now, shifting away from time-based writing, let's get into the process pattern. This is all about logical steps, where one thing comes right after another, exactly like following a strict recipe. It requires very tactile, orderly descriptions. Take the instructions for mending a punctured football. It's meticulously step by step. First, you take the bladder out of its cover.
Next, you inflate it and dip it in water to find the hole. Then you mark the spot, and finally, you apply the rubber solution. Think about the sheer absurdity of messing up a linear process like this. If you try to apply the rubber solution before taking the bladder out of the cover, the entire process completely fails, and you're just left with a ruined football and a huge mess.
And this exact same sequential approach works for highly abstract concepts too. Think about a programmer building software. You translate the algorithm, then key punch the program. Next, you have to intensely test the program. That testing step feeds directly into correcting the bugs, which finally lets you safely run the program. This applies literally everywhere. Whether you're a mechanic fixing a tire, a programmer coding a database, or a project manager outlining a workflow, the linear process pattern is exactly what keeps your instructions from instantly devolving into total chaos.
Section 5. Sequences and Grammar, the final polish. To make sure you're actually keeping your reader on track, transition words are your best friend. Think of these sequencing words like turn signals for your reader's brain. Words like first or initially to start, next or subsequently for the middle steps, and finally at the end. They give your reader advance warning of exactly how the events or logical steps relate to each other. I mean, we've all experienced how exhausting it is to read an email where the author completely forgot their turn signals. You end up rereading sentences 3 times just to figure out where the logic is even heading.
But sometimes you actually want to break the rules for dramatic effect. To really make an impact, a clever writer might intentionally skip using sequences for several sentences, delaying the turn signals until the very end of a paragraph. Picture a piece describing a 1949 solar-heated house. The writer describes the blinding sun, the blackened metal plates, the rapidly circulating air, all without a single sequencing word. The tension builds, the air moves faster, the heat rises, and then boom, right at the very end, before the heat could be blown around the house, it was first stored in large tanks containing Glaber's salt. By deliberately delaying the signposts, the writer abruptly stops the momentum, brilliantly highlighting the most surprising step of the whole process. Finally, let's talk about the passive voice. Now, I know, writing coaches always tell us to avoid the passive voice like the plague, but in objective scientific writing, it is an incredibly powerful, highly deliberate structural tool. Take the active sentence. Hired laborers load the rice. The agent, the laborer, is totally stealing the focus. But look at the passive sentence. The rice is threshed by machines. Here, the doer of the action is completely hidden. Scientific descriptions embrace the passive voice because who does the action doesn't matter at all. By intentionally removing the agent, you shine a blinding spotlight purely on the process itself.
We've covered a ton of ground in this explainer today, from the overarching blueprint of an essay all the way down to the exact transition words and verb voices that guide your reader's mind. Because ultimately, writing isn't just about throwing words onto a page, it is about intentionally building an experience. So the next time you sit down to write an email, a critical report, or an essay, just remember, you are the architect. The only question is, are you building a clear, brilliantly illuminated pathway for your reader's mind, or are you trapping them in a chaotic maze of your own making?